Thank you, everybody who's attending today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Dave Kluger. I'm the CTO at STORCOM. We are a partner and MSP that works with HPE, and we're excited to be here today and have a great conversation with Joe Vidal, who's going to be leading us down the path of understanding HPE's presence and kind of platform around HPE workloads, solutions that work with VDI. I think it's obviously a very poignant topic that we're seeing a lot of traction with, I'm sure, as well as HPE. And there's probably a lot of people that are hopefully here today that want to learn more about this because with everything that's happened in the last year or so now, we've seen a major uptick in the demand and interest around virtual desktop solutions. Remote access is obviously on the top of everyone's mind, but probably even more so security. And we're going to go over a lot of the aspects of how VDI will play into benefits and bringing your IT environment forward in a way that hopefully we'll be able to take advantage of all the benefits that the VDI workloads on HPE platform can provide. So I'm going to turn this over to Joe now. He's got quite a bit of content here to go over. We're going to do some questions and answers later on. We'll do some follow-up and explain some more how STORCOM works with HPE and so forth. But Joe, I'm going to turn this over to you. Again, thank you very much for joining, and it should be a good conversation.
You got it. And thanks, Dave. And thank you everybody for joining us in here today to follow along at home or wherever you might be. So I'm going to cover just a few of the market trends that are driving the move to VDI and understand all what it is that we mean when I talk about virtual desktop infrastructure, because VDI, kind of like the cloud, means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And more importantly, many of you may have had a VDI experience and it may not have been a good one. So we want to talk about what's changed in the technology space recently over the last couple of years, and maybe even just yesterday, right, in some of the announcements that HPE made yesterday that are changing the experience that you should expect to see. So as I get into that, let me just talk first and set up the picture as to what's driving virtual desktop infrastructure, what's driving VDI, one of the top dynamics that we're all working with right now, and that is a move to remote workers, right? Everybody was forced home at right about 1 year ago this week, right? And we've been home ever since. Now, some of us are starting to get back to work, and what I mean is get back to the office for working. However, we see right here that 75% see that the pandemic is accelerating their transformation, meaning their digital transformation, right? 60% say that their top concern is just simply keeping their employees safe and proactive. And I would hopefully say that 90% plus are seeking to keep their customers safe, right? And keep that customer experience safe and secure, whether you're coming into a shared customer environment or not. But more importantly, when you're driving those access to everything, how can you do that securely and safely? But more importantly, how can I do that without wasting your employees' time waiting for screen refreshes and pushing out and spending an exorbitant amount of money to ensure that there's a secure device at their home office, B, it's a secure network, and C, that you're securing the data that's being kept on site at your employees' home offices, because most home offices are not as secure as we would like them to be, right? And guess what? VDI can help solve a lot of those things. But here the key is that 56% want to work remote all the time now, not just through the end of the pandemic, while 78% employees would like the flexibility to work at home some of the time. Now, the question is, how is it that our business leaders versus our employees are looking at the dynamics and the desires that they'd like to be able to drive within the workplace, right? When I look at employees are driving knowledge, they want collaboration, and they miss collaboration because a lot of them aren't seeing the face-to-face. There's no time around the water cooler. There's no time around the elevators, right? Or the lobby, or going outside and taking a smoke break, whatever it might be, or maybe it's taking a coffee break in the cafeteria. Those things aren't happening. However, some of us have found ways to do virtual coffee breaks, virtual happy hour, virtual water cooler time, things like that. And I encourage that wholeheartedly. At the same time, our business leaders and our employers are looking at employee safety. accelerating the culture, engaging and enabling the employees to actually do collaboration, to share innovation, come up with more innovative ideas, and to empower them to drive that across the entire workforce while reducing workplace costs. All of these things are things that every one of the employees that I've been talking about are looking at doing while we're trying to find better ways to work remote. And I'd imagine that there's a lot of you that experienced or were forced out to do VDI, stand-up VDI in an emergency basis, stand-up VMs on an emergency basis. You might even have had to borrow from DR or borrow from your application development environments in those we're going to call it the infrastructure, and had to reprovision it in order to stand up sufficient VMs or VDI resources to send the people home a year ago. Now, I'm sure that you were expecting that you would be getting those infrastructure resources back at the end of the pandemic. But now that we know 35 to 55% of all former in-office workers are never actually coming back to the office, how do you get the resources back with a zero budget in order to stand up the DR or re-stand up DR, reclaim disaster recovery, reclaim the application development resources needed to keep people working and to keep those new applications now rolling out, now that we know that this is in fact the permanent new normal, while we define how many people are working on site. So 26 believe that the workplace is going to be permanently changed or has permanently changed, as I just mentioned. So depending on who you're talking to, it's between 35 and 55, and as you saw, the 51% there. Now, the question about VDI is, how easy is it to access, right? What kind of flexibility do I have? What's the performance? Is VDI really just for the low end, transactional user, or can this really truly now today handle my high end AutoCAD 3D design users and everything in between? And more importantly, give me a secure environment to run it all, so that I don't have to worry about the data that's sitting and residing on my employees' home networks that we all know is not secure, because you can't control everything all the way out to a person's home network. You can't control Jimmy or Johnny or my name's Joe or Joey out there on the driveway picking up a USB stick that was from a spear phishing attack or attempt on you as an executive. And by the way, the bad actors are absolutely targeting our executives. Why? Because they get the most bang for the spear phishing attack dollar, right? And they're going to toss a USB stick that says Dad's home photos or Dad's pics or something like that. Jimmy, Johnny, Joey are going to pick that up and stick it in a computer somewhere in the home, or maybe in their Xbox 360, and try to see what's in there. And bada bing, bada boom, now all of a sudden you've got a keylogger on the network. So the nice thing about VDI is that it does away with a lot of those opportunities, because it at least does away with storing any actual data on your home network. Now, granted, a keylogger is still going to be an issue, and you need to continue to watch for those and train your people. But in the meantime, we have ways around resource consolidation to enhance the security, simplify management, increase productivity, and reduce costs, all in a virtual environment. And I'm going to step you through some of those in just a moment. But let's define the difference between task worker, knowledge worker, and power user, because this really dictates the type of VDI solution that you need to get or need to implement in order to satisfy and drive your business without impacting your workers' performance, right? When I looked at a task worker, sure, that's telemedicine, database entry, as I said, transactional type of workers, client-server browsing-based apps, maybe even Office 365, because all you're really using is a browser accessing that, right? Accessing your information. Or if you actually have a hosted version or a synchronous version, then that's going to take a little heavier user, especially if you're creating slides locally and then syncing those back to the Office 365 server. Let's say if you're running on Microsoft Azure, for instance, right? And office work or remote learning, customer service, collaboration, back office apps, those are all what we consider to be knowledge workers. Anything above that is a power user, right? CAD, CAM, design, engineering, 3D modeling, if you're modeling and interfacing with something in real time. And by the way, we even have ways that I can host VDI such that I can interact with it on my cell phone on, let's say, a Citrix mobile app, and still do the 3D modeling and design and see it react and rotate in real time on my cell phone. So these are solutions that absolutely, and obviously the the 3D model is not running on my cell phone, right? It's running in a VDI instance via Citrix or via VMware Horizon or something like that, right? So lots of different ways that we can do that. So let's step through some of the solutions for VDI. First off, there's rapid remote working solutions. There's enterprise grade VDI with Citrix and VMware. Understand that our point next services and our STORCOM assessment services delivered by STORCOM, as you're going to hear in just a minute from Dave, are other ways that we can help you figure out what the right solution is for you. In the meantime, we can do that rapid remote working solution, access to Microsoft Teams or VDI in Azure, as I mentioned, or even Citrix Cloud, all the way up through enterprise grade VDI with or without dedicated GPUs or shared GPUs. That's graphical processor units, something that's going to drive that higher end graphical engine, right? And share those GPU cores. I even have solutions that go all the way up to an over 500 shared GPU cores with a Tesla engine, right? Not the car, by the way, but the NVIDIA Tesla shared GPU cloud solution. So we've got scale up and scale down agility with Citrix and VMware VDI, whether that's in a private GreenLake cloud or a colo hosted solution or something other. There's lots of different solutions here, but more importantly, because each solution is different, there's not just one set of infrastructure, unlike some of the cloud providers would have you believe that everything fits on the same type of infrastructure. I'll just throw more boxes at it. Well, that's not always the right solution, right? Maybe I actually do need some GPUs. Maybe I need faster storage, not just more storage, right? It's not just about the volume of the data. It's about the velocity that the data is moving in order to access that in a VDI instance that's right for the application or the worker's workload, right? And the type of user that it is. Now, we presented a couple new storage platforms yesterday with an HPE announcement on May the 4th, because as we all know, May the 4th be with you. And because the 4th is with us and the Force is with us as well, we announced some great things yesterday. I'm going to share those with you in just a moment. But understand that when you're looking at VDI for using hyperconverged infrastructure, there's several different solutions from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise available, from SimpliVity through the ProLiant DX powered by Nutanix, all the way up to our storage DHCI, that's disaggregated HCI or disaggregated hyperconverged infrastructure. Try saying that 5 times real fast. So there's lots of different solutions, and they all depend on what type of storage you're connecting to and how fast you need access to that and how much there is. So what's the volumetric growth? What's the starting capacity? What's the ending targeted capacity? And how fast and how much of that are you accessing at any one time? Maybe you need something that's composable and you want to use HPE Synergy with a VMware VCF, VMware Cloud Federation, and vSAN type solution. Guess what? We can do that with Synergy, right? We can do that all the way up using a regular standard, you know them and love them well, ProLiant servers or ProLiant DL380 or 360, and maybe even connecting to the new Alletra 6,000 and 9,000 storage. These are the storage solutions that are now replacing or the renaming of and the next generation of our Nimble and Primera storage, all the way up to Moonshot with Citrix hosting HDI. That's hosted desktop infrastructure. That's not virtualized desktop infrastructure, but this is how we align a single server cartridge to each user and then re-provision it and remap it to a new user when that user logs off. And then this one 5U shelf, I can host 45 server cartridges there. So that's a lot of compute capacity, starting all the way up with server-based compute, which is 1-to-1, all the way up through VDI, through higher-end VDI, and then hosted desktop infrastructure. So lots of different ways we can host this. But let me talk to you a little bit about the differences between hyperconverged VDI, traditional VDI, DHCI, which is the disaggregated HCI, meaning that I'm disaggregating the storage. It's not an appliance, but it does still have the appliance feel because it's managed via a single front end, and that would typically be the VMware front end, right? And then same thing goes with composable VDI, HDI VDI, or hosted desktop infrastructure, is still within the VDI family, even though it's HDI. And then we have graphical accelerated VDI, or graphics accelerated VDI. And by the way, graphics accelerated VDI goes all the way back and can be mapped all the way into basically all of these platforms across the bottom here. Every single one of them can have any number of GPUs, and not any number of GPUs, anywhere from, I believe 2 is the least we can put in there, all the way up to 8 GPUs per node. And by the way, the new announcements yesterday were all about Elytra storage. So the Elytra storage is the Elytra 6000, is the new renaming of the Nimble storage array, and the Elytra 9000 is the Primera. Now you'll notice new packaging, second generation code, and more importantly, a simpler front end, which is ops driven. So we have an ops driven storage management platform that makes it easier than ever to manage your storage and manage the storage that's mapped to your VDI and to your VMware VMs, and any other type of VMs that you might have. Whether it's extreme versatility, extreme scale, or even extreme performance, all the way up through HCI, VDI, and HDI. We're mapping these out and trying to make it very easy for you to understand that the ProLiant DX, powered by Nutanix, this is one of the number one, number two, tied for number one or number two with VMware, right? By the way, in the VDI space, or actually in the HCI space. Okay, now, understand that Nutanix runs on ProLiant DX, and when you run Nutanix on our ProLiant servers or in a ProLiant DX model option there, you get all the extra security from Silicon Root of Trust that's only available from HPE, in a platform that's been granted the Cyber Catalyst Award for the most secure hardware platform on the planet as far as servers. It's the only enterprise server platform, or a server platform for that matter, that has the Cyber Catalyst Award. This means that it's recognized by the Marsh Insurance Underwriters Organization, and that those insurance providers that are providing data security insurance or cybersecurity insurance are then authorized and encouraged to offer even a discount for those HPE ProLiant customers that are utilizing our solutions because of that Cyber Catalyst Award recognition, because of what we put in the ILO 5 from our Gen 10 servers on, giving you that Silicon Root of Trust that guarantees that the firmware cannot be hacked. More importantly, we detect, we respond, and we recover all automatically. And this is something that the insurance organization recognizes a huge value, and it makes us an entire generation or two ahead of our competition in this particular space. Now, we're focused on delivering the edge to cloud, whether it be in a co-location, a data center, a private data center, a shared data center. More importantly, everything in a self-service or pay-per-use environment. And it's really good to know if you're familiar with the insurance organization out there that advertises that pay for only what you need in insurance. Well, they're now paying for only what they need in IT because they're one of our latest GreenLake customers. And when it comes to scaling up and scaling down, rarely is it that people's utilization continues to scale up or scales up nice and smooth, right? It typically scales up ratchets, boom, 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 or jumps up and then jumps back down, then jumps up or jumps back down, then jumps down again, and then moves up. The good news is that as you move up or move down, you literally pay only for what you need. And so when you're looking at a VDI solution, whether it's in the public cloud or a private cloud, understand that when you're in the public cloud, there are data egress fees. And that volume and velocity of data that I talked about, and the gravity, or the data gravity, that really is the driving force that forces you into making decisions as to where that data needs to be hosted, or keeping you from being able to move it and optimize it as you would wish, right? That's one of those things that gets you on the back end, data egress fees. Data ingress fees, that's uploading the data to the public cloud service providers. They'll take that willingly, and they'll store it for about 5 cents per gigabyte. By the way, we can do that too, right? We can do that in a private environment. Now, the problem is, it's like a Jerry Seinfeld episode. Everybody can take the reservations. I'll take your reservation. I'll take your reservation. I'll take your reservation. It's keeping the reservation and keeping the data and giving it back when the customer wants it or when you want it, but giving it back without charging more for the for the feature, for the pleasure of getting your data back, right? The nice thing is that when you're using a GreenLake private cloud, you don't pay extra to get your data back. More importantly, the Elytra 9000, the formerly Primera storage, is 100% uptime and availability solution that can still be delivered at 5 to 6 plus cents per gigabyte. Very similar, if not lower cost than the public cloud service providers. And it's always lower cost than the public cloud service providers when you add in the egress fees and the security that you typically need for enterprise grade security. The nice thing is to understand that with GreenLake, you have a local buffer that always keeps that extra 10% there ahead of your needs. And then when you scale back down, we scale back down, right? We deprovision those. And not only do you stop paying for the infrastructure, you stop paying for the software layer as well for most application stacks. That goes for VMware, that goes for Microsoft. And let's face it, the VM tax can be very, very high, in some cases more expensive than the server itself. So being able to turn that off as your utilization demand or your demand drops, your utilization should drop and you shouldn't have to pay for that anymore. And that is exactly the case with HPE GreenLake. We free up your resources. We pay only for what you consume or what you need, and you always have extra capacity ahead of your demand. You never want to find yourself in a case where demand exceeds available resources. We call that it's an OSM. And for those of you that have heard me speak before, you know what an OSM is. It's an something moment. So with HPE GreenLake, we get rid of those OSMs, right? So that you always have the additional resources you need. Now, whether that's compute, storage, GPU, support, management, all as a service, managing Citrix and VMware on top to drive that VDI solution for the task workers, the knowledge users, and the power users alike, we can choose from all kinds of different desktop options there to give you that single monthly bill. Now, as we talk about the additional HPE value, one of the things that we add, of course, is the global set of experts that we have, 25,000 IT experts globally with over 11,000 IT projects delivered per year, driving over $8 billion of revenue. Not that you care about that, but that keeps us in business across 80 different countries and 30 plus different ecosystems. And we have everything from advisory services, professional services, operational services to operate, consume, and simplify the consumption of your environment. And of course, what we're doing is keeping your environment up and running. So we're really good about taking the reservation and actually keeping the reservation for you so that we're keeping your data available, keeping your infrastructure available, whether we're housing and managing that on your data center in your facility or in a colo service provider's facility of your choice or in a hosted facility, entirely hosted. So you get to choose how much of it you want to manage or how much you want us to manage on your behalf. It's very, very flexible, and there's lots of different options there. Now, we talk about financing offers for the new normal. We can either defer or reduce expenses, and this is a really cool one. As I kind of wrap up before I hand it back over to Dave here, I want to just call out the fact that I mentioned earlier, a lot of us unfortunately had to re-provision either our app dev environments or part of our app dev environments or our DR or part of our DR environments, hoping that we would get that back. Now we know that's not coming back. But how do I create money and capital so that I can invest in new projects where I may have unfortunately accidentally spent most of my OPEX or CAPEX budget at the beginning of this year or last year and borrowed into FY21 in order to stand up those VMs or VDI to send the people home in the first place? Well, with GreenLake, we can get the infrastructure in 2 to 3 weeks. We can run it in parallel for another 30 days. And well before day 91, which is when that first bill is due, we can allow you to then start deprovisioning that old infrastructure that's been running in parallel. We'll buy that older infrastructure back from you, give you cash for that, CapEx dollars, that will then fund months 4, 5, 6, or give you the cash needed to fund some of those other projects that you didn't think you had budget for in FY21. So this is a great way to generate cash from your assets and infuse those budget dollars that you need to get through FY21 and get back to and on track with your new normal. And of course, then we'll match the payments to your use. Now with that, I know I covered a lot and hopefully we've got some great questions out there and we'll get those in the Q&A. But before we get there, I want to turn it over to Dave Kruger so that he can take us through STORCOM'S value. Dave, back to you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Great job, and a lot of good content there. I think that a lot of what you talked about is a lot of what we see at Storcom, obviously being down in the trenches with our clients over the last year plus. As you mentioned, there's no doubt that COVID and the pandemic has made a major change. I mean, VDI is obviously it's not a new concept. VDI has been around for quite some time. I think one of the main things that we've seen as a change is some of our clients in the mid market are now taking a much deeper look at it because of all of the benefits that it has brought from the standpoint of with people working from remotely, right? With the new remote workforce, you talked about the 50+% people not coming back to work, but we're gonna have to deal with that in some way, and managing endpoints from an administrative standpoint is becoming much more difficult when people are working remotely. Not only that, the other big aspect of this is security. We've also seen over the last year, I mean, a major uptick in the amount of ransomware, malware, everything that's going on. It's an administrative nightmare for desktop support people to try to manage that remotely, with people trying to have different types of hardware platforms and so forth. With VDI, we had a number of our clients come to us and talk to us about, I need to find some way to rein this in and come up with a standardized desktop environment where I can protect the endpoint, I can put on the appropriate software, everybody is controlled, and I don't care what they're using at home. I don't even care if they pick up their kid's Chromebox, Chromebook from school and connect. That's fine. It doesn't make a difference, because now the endpoint is nothing more than just a device that allows you to connect into a safe and secure data network. So, our value proposition, I think, comes in the fact that we have kind of two aspects to this. We have our managed services division. So we have our own data centers where we also work with HPE. Our back-end storage and compute infrastructure is built on HPE platforms. We've been a nimble partner prior to even HPE doing the acquisition. So we use that technology ourselves. So we built up an environment that has, our own CPU and performance capabilities to provide workloads for different types of client environments. And then the same thing also is said for building that as an on-prem. VDI, hosted VDI has certain parameters and challenges that have to be taken into account. So when we're doing an assessment, we look at it, is that possible? Are there benefits there? A lot of it has to do with how close am I to the data source? What are those challenges are going to be? For some of our clients who actually host their infrastructure as a service in our data centers, it's a very viable option, because now they can basically, get into the VDI workspace without having to make an acquisition cost, which is very similar to, the whole GreenLake model. But, there's still a lot of clients out there who are looking at this from an on-prem standpoint. So, what we do is try to look at this, holistically. We have let's see. I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. So we have a methodology behind how we do our assessments. We're gonna talk a little bit about it at the end, but we're offering anybody who's interested to have us come in, do an assessment, a free assessment of high level. Okay, what do we try to accomplish here? But we have a methodology around discovery analysis and building a roadmap. And as part of that, we've really kind of developed a process here to really look at how am I going to address the desktop workload needs. And the two main concepts, I think, probably that are poignant to at least discuss it from today's standpoint is, Joe, you mentioned talking about GPU requirements. We're seeing more and more of our clients as a baseline, not even trying to do any type of VDI without having used at least a basic GPU. We just did a deployment for a bank where they knew that they're going to be doing Zoom calls, so they don't have a lot of GPU provision for every single desktop, but these are just their basic customer service type people, but they want to be able to do Zoom calls. Well, you're not going to do that without using any type of GPU at all, so we have to do profiles to build that. Now on the other side of that, we're also doing high-end CAD CAM for an architectural firm. And these are things that previously would have never been attainable for customers that were trying to do VDI. They had looked at it previously. They had looked at what the options were, and really just the performance wasn't there. And Joe, as you mentioned, I mean, with products like the Apollo platform, being able to put literally eight double wide GPU cards in there, the A40 cards from NVIDIA, and having a ridiculous amount of GPU memory. And you'd say, well, they're looking at the TCOs around this to try to figure out, okay, do I buy a high-end Mac, or do we go down this route? One of the things that they discovered, which there was a kind of internal debate as we did this analysis, was, does this really make sense financially? And one of the things they discovered is that they are now doing something called design by day and render by night, which never would have been possible previously. So what they do is they have a profile that a user uses during the middle of the day. They do their work in Revit, so they're doing their design work and so forth. But then at night, they take that same profile and they throw a ton of GPU at just one user. And that one user is not actually doing anything. They're doing all the rendering. So they render these high definition 8K video files from the renderings, and they would never be able to do that if they were trying to work on a standalone desktop or laptop, even with high-end GPU enabled, for instance, like MacBooks and so forth, that have a fair amount of power. This gives them flexibility that they never even imagined they would have previously. So there's a lot that you can do with VDI that changes the parameters on how your end users can work. And the last thing I'd point out too is understanding, the concept around, we're going to look at things like link clones versus instant clones. How do I leverage a master image, a golden image of what my desktop should look like that everybody's going to get, so they don't have to keep managing patching all these different endpoints, which again goes back to the administrative costs and savings of a solution like this. So that's kind of our overall methodology around doing a VDI assessment. We'd love to have the chance to talk to anybody out there who'd like to schedule something like that. I'm going to open this up real briefly to see if there's any questions for Joe or myself that are specific to the topics that we've been talking about. Heidi, I don't know if you if any questions have come in that you want to.
And we're looking for tough questions, folks. Tough questions. Come on.
Tough ones, exactly.
There's no bad questions. Yeah.
I have a few questions here. The first would be, are there any examples of an application or worker load that doesn't translate well to a VDI environment?
Great question. Great question. I would say, and that's a trick question. At least I believe it's a trick question, because to be honest with you, I can't think of a single application that can't be done via VDI. And I'll give you an example as to why I make that statement. Even when we look at what we're doing with supercomputers with, 100 plus teraflop supercomputers, or even our 1 to 1.5 exaflop supercomputers now, guess how you interface them? You interface them via a web interface, right? And a web interface and a web client can absolutely be done on VDI, right? Could you manage your server infrastructure back in the office via VDI? Absolutely. In fact, I'd prefer that people do that, right? Because that's the most secure way to do that. Dave, what do you think? Can you think of a single application that can't be done via VDI or shouldn't be done via VDI?
No, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I don't think there's any application workflows. I think the biggest, the only challenges that we see, this is part of, again, doing a proper assessment, really has more to do with, especially when you're dealing with remote workers, and we saw this during the pandemic, is the problems really come in more on the source side. So somebody has an old Wi-Fi router sitting at home and it's not a very good network. Okay, well that's going to cause some problems. Yeah. We had a client of ours who did a rollout. They decided that it was cheaper for them to, instead of trying to troubleshoot people's home networks, they went out and bought basically, I don't know whether it was a Google Home or what it was. They bought a standardized wireless solution for everybody's home, because that way they knew how they could support it. They knew it was going to work well. And, all their clients are on, that's not a shameless plug for Xfinity, but let's just use Xfinity, and they knew what the bandwidth they were getting. And they've had little to no problems. I mean, that's the only real problem with VDI that potentially can come up on a workload, is more on the source side. But you're right, workload-wise, there's nothing that you can't do in a VDI.
Right, and you know what? Today, as long as our employees have a 4G connection on a cell phone, that's going to be about a 1.5 megabit connection. That's really more than it takes for sending and receiving the graphics of your desktop itself, right? And if we've employed the new or the older HPI graphics, remote graphics, they called it RGS, which is now like the Z remote graphics solution from our HPI brethren on the Hewlett Packard Inc. side of the house. That solution is even driving the latest 3D rendering solutions for, let's just say, the big movie studios, and they're doing those with 3D rendering in real time via VDI and RGS, so RGS powered VDI. That's remote graphics. So if they can do that on that, yes, absolutely. And by the way, Dave's absolutely right. It's a lot less expensive to go out and buy somebody let's just say an Aruba access point for a couple $100.
I should have said Aruba.
Yes, you should have said Aruba, Dave. So we could put an Aruba access point out there. I'm not going to share with you what the HP employee price is because it would make you sick to your stomach. But let's just say that I'm really proud. I'm proud owner of 4 Aruba access points now, Wi-Fi 6 technology. I've got over 2 gig of bandwidth, right? 1 gig up, 1 gig down synchronously from AT&T on dedicated fiber. It's just me and the central office switch, and I am loving life. So yeah, there's no reason with the price that connectivity has come down, and now with Wi-Fi, let's just say 5G coming out and on the horizon for just about everybody. If you're in a major urban area and you're in a downtown area like downtown Atlanta, you probably have 5G available already, or any one of the other major cities around the country. It's going to make it to the rest of us. But there are other ways. Even 4G cellular communications can drive pretty much everything that we talked about. It's all about the VDI infrastructure on the back end doing all the heavy lifting to just send you the screen scrapes and the updates in a secure environment. So what other questions do you have?
Another question would be, we were forced to push a lot of VDI into the cloud at the beginning of COVID, and now we're beginning to see that data egress fees are going up. Is there something that Storcom or HPE can do to help?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, yeah, you're getting the egress fees, and those are the cha-ching factor, the wow factor. Those first couple pieces of candy on the playground are free, but boy, do they charge you extra on the third and fourth piece, right? Once you're hooked. Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, HPE GreenLake private cloud. And we have some great ways that we can do an assessment. I see a question here from Bradley Herrera out there to all of us that how can he schedule time for a one-on-one VDI discussion with Storcom? Well, actually, Dave's going to talk about that. But in the meantime, yes, the GreenLake, we can do a GreenLake private cloud solution or a cloud volume solution where we simply put the data across the street from the public cloud service provider's data center. So we move the data, yet we have the high speed 10 to 20 gig pipes across the street to the shared compute that stays in the cloud service, but the storage, the data itself, we put across the street, so you no longer have to pay those data ingress and egress fees. And let's just say that there is a very large, astronomically leading edge space age technology driven by our government that we're now saving over $5 million nearly a month because we got rid of their data egress fees by moving them out of Amazon into a private cloud and onto a 100% available Primera solution, now Elytra 9000, right? That also radically lowered their costs. If we can do that for them, we can do that for you. Nick, what other questions do you have out there?
Well, I think you hit Mr. Herrera's question. So
No. I held it off. Dave's going to answer that question. I really didn't answer that one yet.
Nope.
All right. So Dave, back to you.
Back to me. Yeah. So thank you again. Joe's did. I think you've covered a lot of this. There's a lot of options here for us to help give you more information. We have tons of white papers on our website. As far as the assessment, we're going to be sending this presentation back out to everybody. There's a bunch of hyperlinks in the presentation itself for more information. There's links to a lot of these briefs and white papers that are available. And the best way to, find out more about this is to have a meeting with us, and we can talk about doing an assessment. When we send out the information, our sales team can follow up and set up a time to do a discovery call and find out more about doing a VDI assessment. And here it is. Schedule your VDI assessment. So hopefully for Bradley Herrera, that question gets answered. But
So Dave, what you're
STORCOM,
saying is, but wait, there's more. We can give you a
there's
VDI
more.
assessment. So how do they
That's
go
right.
about getting one of these, Dave?
Well, they'll schedule a complimentary call with STORCOM sales team, and then we can talk about scheduling a desktop assessment. And we have that methodology that we use. We also use a number of different VDI assessment tools to basically provide workload information and understanding. There's a lot more to VDI than, ironically, you'd think. In some ways, a desktop doesn't seem like it's that complicated, but when you take a number of, when you start dealing with hundreds of desktops, the performance requirements around desktop and VDI are actually a lot more intensive than a virtual server infrastructure, other than maybe high-end OLTP databases. But a web server is basically sitting there doing nothing all day long in comparison to what a VDI environment has to do. Your little spinning hard drive and your desktop or laptop that you're using, or even now it's an SSD, is quite demanding when you start to take that same number and timesing that by 100, 200, 300, 400 machines, CPU utilization, different types of workloads. So doing an assessment is an absolute necessity with VDI. There's no way to really get around that. You can get some ballpark ideas of what cost will look like. You can make some assumptions based upon general worker environments, different types of workloads, but ultimately the assessment is necessary. So that's typically its own SOW. And then from that, basically out of that will come the actual build out of the VDI environment, which will then include all the hardware and software necessary from partners like HPE, and whether it's Citrix or VMware or Nutanix, it may be.
Right, Dave. Let me just talk through a couple examples here. So, there are literally hundreds of banking financial institutions using VDI for the bank teller, teller location, or the teller device itself, and there are literally thousands of point of sale devices out there in consumer retail that are using VDI. But those are radically different solutions, right? And let's face it, if the connectivity goes down, you can't have the entire client engagement or transaction just die, right? So there are certain things that we have to look for when we're measuring what does that transaction look like, right? We'll meter that transaction. We'll actually capture the entire transaction and the communication from the device or the client all the way back to the server, and then replicate that in a way that allows us to simulate multiplying that workload by tens to hundreds or even thousands, and looking to see what that does to your network and to your server infrastructure to right size it specifically for you based on the connectivity that you have available. So these are things that all go into that assessment. It's not just something we can go in and sit down with you and in 2 hours we have all your answers. We're going to actually measure these things, put in some applications that are going to capture the transaction, going to capture how you're using that, sit down, do some assessments, some application assessments, look at how you're using the data, and then make those decisions with you. Right, Dave?
Yep, absolutely. And I would say, as a final point on this whole, not to beat the dead horse here, but around the assessment piece, is that if you've ever talked with anybody who's deployed VDI before and they tell you that, yeah, we tried it, it didn't work for us, I can pretty much guarantee you they didn't do an assessment.
That's right.
That is 9 times out of 10 why it did not work. Now, the technology has changed. I mean, 5 years ago, yeah, there was a lot of other reasons why it wasn't working with people. Whether it's Horizon, Nutanix, Citrix, I mean, the back end underlying hypervisor technologies have advanced quite a bit, but even back then, probably there wasn't a proper assessment done, because there's a lot of planning. The majority of the services that go into deploying a VDI solution are the majority of all the planning and the research that needs to go into building the proper images, the proper profiles, building up personas, and so forth. So that takes a lot of work, and once that's done, then it's really, for the most part, it becomes very easy to manage. And that's the whole, concept behind it. So I think, hopefully touched upon that. And thank you. Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate you taking the time and talking to everybody about this. And
you got it, Dave. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Together. And again, hopefully we'll follow up with everybody, and we'll be sending out this deck later on today.
And let's make sure that
and
everybody signs up. So Heidi has posted in the chat a pointer where you can go online and sign up for a free VDI assessment. If you don't have the chat box open, please click on the little chat window there in the bottom center of your screen, pop that up, and you'll see a pointer to where you can go out right now and sign up for a free VDI assessment. Everybody will be receiving this deck, as Dave mentioned, and then there you'll also see the pointer to there. I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. If somebody wants to do that right now, let's do that. And we tell the attendees that snack boxes will be sent shortly. Ooh, that's kind of cool. Dave, did you get a snack box? Talk to him about the snack boxes. What do you know about snack boxes?
Heidi, can you tell us about the snack boxes?
Sure.
I don't know anything about a snack box. I'm sitting here right now. I'm pretty hungry.
Yeah, I know snack pack. I don't know snack box. Yeah.
The snack boxes are specially curated, just little goodies from all across the world, which is kind of nice. So today's attendees will be receiving a snack box shortly.
Very cool.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you, everybody. Hopefully,
these are things that you don't tend to find in your local grocery store or supermarket. So we hope you enjoy them.
That's right, and I'll send you out with a last note here. Be sure to be safe, be happy, be healthy, and thanks for sharing your time with us. And hopefully you get to enjoy something like what Dave has on his screen there.
You got it. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.